Martha threw away every block of cheese in her refrigerator the week she was diagnosed. 3 years later, her blood sugar was worse, not better. She had done everything her doctor never actually told her to do. And that mistake, the one almost every newly diagnosed adult over 50 makes, might be quietly working against millions of people right now. Here's what nobody tells you at the moment of diagnosis. Not all cheese is the same food. There is a real cheese, and there is an imposter wearing its name. One of them may support your pancreas. The other one is actively undermining it, and most people can't tell the difference just by reading a label. Over the last decade, diabetes researchers kept noticing the same unexpected pattern showing up again and again in the data. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which 5 cheeses deserve a place back in your kitchen, which 3 grocery store staples are silently sabotaging your progress, and which single cheese, sitting quietly in almost every pantry in America, is tied directly to how your pancreas releases insulin. Because once you understand what happens inside your body after each bite, you'll never look at the dairy aisle the same way again. I'm Dr. Rubio Santner, Metabolic Health Simplified. Let's start with the imposter hiding in your refrigerator right now. Open your refrigerator right now. Go ahead, picture it. There's a good chance something in there isn't what it claims to be. I'm talking about the individually wrapped cheese slice. The one that peels off in a perfect square. The one that doesn't even need refrigeration on the store shelf. Ask yourself, how many times have you eaten one without thinking twice? Here's the uncomfortable part. That product isn't really cheese. Not in any meaningful sense. Strip away the packaging, and what's left is a mix of modified starches, vegetable oils, emulsifiers, and often a small amount of added sugar, engineered to melt smoothly and last for months. It's built in a lab to imitate cheese, not to behave like it inside your body. Think about Harold, 68 years old, pre-diabetic, who ate 2 of these slices on his sandwich every single day for a decade. He thought he was doing something neutral, just cheese, right? But what he was actually doing was replacing a whole food with an engineered one, and his body could tell the difference, even if his taste buds couldn't. Here's a simple way to think about it. Imagine comparing a real orange to a piece of orange candy. Same color, same flavor note, but only one of them carries the fiber, the water, the nutrients your body actually recognizes and knows what to do with. The other one is a costume. That processed slice is the costume version of cheese. And here's the surprising part almost nobody talks about. Real cheese, made simply from milk, salt, and cultures, goes through fermentation. That process creates beneficial compounds your gut bacteria respond to. The processed version skips all of that. It never ferments. It's assembled, not aged, which means it delivers almost none of the quiet metabolic support real cheese can offer. So if you've been reaching for that slice thinking you're getting a dairy benefit, you're likely getting closer to 0. Now here's the real question. If the thing sitting in your fridge door isn't the villain everyone assumes cheese to be, and it isn't the hero either, then what is it doing to your blood sugar every single day? That question gets more interesting once we look at the next trap, because this one hides somewhere you'd never expect. It's not wrapped in plastic. It's not sitting on the shelf at room temperature. It's in the refrigerated section, marketed as a shortcut, and most people put it in their cart without ever reading what's actually on the bag. Now open your freezer door. Not the fridge this time, the one right next to it. Somewhere in there, there's probably a bag of shredded cheese. Cheddar, maybe. Mozzarella. Something you grab because it's fast, it's easy, and it feels like a smart shortcut on a busy weeknight. Here's the question worth asking. What is actually coating those little shreds so they don't clump together in the bag? The answer surprises most people. Manufacturers add a thin dusting of cellulose powder and sometimes potato starch to keep the shreds from sticking to each other. It sounds harmless. It sounds like packaging, not food. But here's what that coating actually does inside your body. It adds a small amount of hidden carbohydrate, roughly 1 to 2 grams per serving, that never shows up clearly when you glance at the label. 1 or 2 grams doesn't sound like much on its own, but think about how often that bag gets used. Tacos on Monday, eggs on Wednesday, a salad topping on Friday. Multiply that small hidden number across a week, a month, a year, and you start to see the shape of the problem. Picture Diane, 71, who tracked every carbohydrate on her plate with real discipline, except for the cheese. She never counted it. Why would she? It was just cheese. But those small hidden grams, stacked meal after meal, were quietly working against the very numbers she was trying so hard to control. Here's a simple way to picture it. Imagine trying to keep a bathtub at exactly the right water level, and someone keeps adding a few extra drops every single time you're not looking. No single drop matters, but over weeks, the level creeps up anyway. The fix isn't complicated. A block of real cheese, shredded yourself in 30 seconds with a hand grater, skips that hidden coating entirely. Same cheese, same flavor, none of the invisible extra. But there's a third trap waiting in the dairy aisle, and this one is trickier, because unlike the first two, it isn't fake, and it isn't hiding carbs. It's something else entirely. Something about its ratio of fat to protein that quietly changes how useful it actually is to someone managing blood sugar. There's one more trap left in the dairy aisle, and this one is the trickiest of the three, because nothing about it is fake. Nothing about it is hiding sugar. It's simply built the wrong way for what you're trying to do. I'm talking about cream cheese. Here's the question that matters. Why does something so smooth, so mild, so seemingly harmless end up doing so little for someone managing blood sugar? The answer comes down to ratio. Every cheese has a relationship between fat and protein, and that relationship determines how much metabolic benefit you actually get per bite. Cream cheese is almost all fat, with only a small trace of protein riding along with it. Think of protein as the cheese's engine. It's the part that slows digestion, supports satiety hormones, and gives your blood sugar something steady to hold on to. Fat, on its own, doesn't do that same job. It adds calories, it adds richness, but it doesn't bring the same metabolic leverage. 2 tablespoons of cream cheese on a bagel gives you plenty of the first thing and almost none of the second. It's not dangerous. It's not a villain like the processed slice. It's simply inefficient. Like paying full price for a ticket to a show you only get to watch the first 10 minutes of. Compare that to a cheese like cottage cheese or ricotta, where protein makes up a much larger share of every bite. Same food category, completely different job inside your body. So here's where that leaves us. 3 traps down. The imposter in the fridge door, the hidden coating in the freezer bag, the imbalanced ratio in the tub next to the bagels. Which means it's time to flip the story. Because once you know what to avoid, the next question becomes obvious. What should actually be sitting on that same shelf instead? That's where things get interesting. Starting with a cheese so common, you probably walked past it in the store last week without a second thought. Number 5 on this list is fresh mozzarella. And I'm starting here on purpose, because it's sitting in almost every grocery store in the country. You don't need anything specialty. You could pick this up on your way home today. Here's the question worth sitting with for a second. What does a soft, mild, almost bland-tasting cheese actually have to offer someone managing blood sugar? The answer isn't in the flavor. It's in the fermentation. Fresh mozzarella is a live, cultured food. It carries active bacterial cultures that behave like a mild probiotic once they reach your gut. And over the last decade, one of the most active areas in metabolic research has been the relationship between that gut environment and how well your body responds to insulin. A more balanced gut produces short-chain fatty acids, including one called butyrate, which appears to support the very cells in your pancreas responsible for producing insulin. A healthier gut also tends to run quieter, with less of the low-grade background inflammation that slowly feeds insulin resistance, especially past age 50. Let me tell you about Kathleen, 67 years old. She had cut every form of dairy out of her kitchen for nearly 3 years, convinced that saturated fat was working against her. Her numbers weren't improving, and she was constantly hungry between meals. I asked her to do one small thing: add a modest serving of fresh mozzarella to her lunch a few times a week, alongside tomato and basil. Nothing dramatic. 3 months later, her long-term blood sugar marker had come down meaningfully, and the afternoon cravings she'd lived with for years had quietly disappeared. Here's the analogy that makes this stick. Think of your gut bacteria as the crew running the engine room of a ship. Feed them well, and the whole ship runs smoother, quieter, more efficiently. Starve them of anything fermented, and the whole system has to work harder just to stay steady. One thing to watch for: sodium varies widely between brands of fresh mozzarella. So if blood pressure is also part of your picture, the label is worth a second look. Now, if a gentle fermented cheese can quietly support your gut, imagine what happens when we move to a cheese that does something even more direct. Something tied to how long hunger actually stays away after a meal. Number 4 is cottage cheese. And here's the part almost nobody explains correctly. Cottage cheese doesn't protect your blood sugar mainly through what happens in the hour after you eat it. It protects you through what it stops you from doing 2 or 3 hours later. Here's the question that matters. What actually happens in your body when you eat something that's almost pure protein and barely any calories? A typical serving carries close to 12 grams of protein for under 100 calories, one of the highest protein-to-calorie ratios of any food in the dairy case. When you eat that much protein in that small a package, your body releases satiety hormones that keep hunger quiet for the next several hours. And that matters more than most people realize. Because the truth is, the meal in front of you usually isn't the problem. It's the handful of crackers at 3 in the afternoon. It's the cookie grabbed on the way through the kitchen because hunger snuck up faster than willpower could respond. Cottage cheese, eaten at breakfast or mid-morning, quietly closes that door before it ever opens. Think of it like this. Hunger is a pressure valve. Most snack foods release that pressure for 20 minutes and then let it build right back up. A high-protein food like cottage cheese holds that valve steady for hours instead of minutes. There's a second layer working in the background too. Cottage cheese is naturally rich in calcium, and research looking at calcium intake over time has consistently pointed to a connection with improved insulin sensitivity. Not a dramatic overnight shift. A slow, steady contribution that compounds month after month. Here's the trap hiding in plain sight, though. Plain cottage cheese is the version that helps you. The kind swimming in sweetened fruit syrup, sitting right next to it on the same shelf, can carry close to 20 grams of added sugar in a single cup. Same name on the label, completely different food once it reaches your bloodstream. Which raises the next question. If protein content changes everything about how a cheese behaves, what happens when we cross the Mediterranean to a cheese made from a completely different kind of milk altogether? Number 3 takes us across the Mediterranean to a cheese most people think they already understand. They don't. Here's the question worth asking. Why does the source of the milk matter as much as the cheese itself? Authentic Greek feta, the kind protected by law in Europe, has to be made from sheep's milk, or a blend of sheep and goat's milk. That single detail changes the entire nutritional story. Sheep's milk carries noticeably higher levels of a fatty acid called conjugated linoleic acid, or CLA, than cow's milk does. And CLA keeps showing up in research tied to improved insulin sensitivity, along with something even more specific, a reduction in visceral fat. Here's why that matters so much. Visceral fat isn't the fat you can pinch at your waistline. It's hidden, wrapped silently around your liver, your pancreas, your intestines. Picture a car engine running fine on the outside, while a thick layer of grease slowly builds up underneath, forcing every part to work harder and wear out faster than it should. That's what visceral fat quietly does to the organs that regulate your blood sugar. Feta also happens to be fermented, which means it carries the same gut-supporting bacteria we talked about with mozzarella, layered on top of the CLA benefit. But here's the catch, and it's the reason most people never actually get this benefit. The tub of crumbled feta sitting in most American supermarkets is frequently made from cow's milk, not sheep's milk. Same name, same texture. A completely different fatty acid profile underneath. If the label doesn't specifically say sheep's milk, you're likely holding the wrong version. One more thing worth knowing. Feta is salty by design since it's preserved in brine. A quick rinse under cold water before using it can cut that sodium meaningfully without losing the flavor that makes it worth eating in the first place. So if a cheese's milk source can change its entire metabolic story, what happens when we look at a cheese made from an entirely different part of the milk altogether? The part most people don't even realize gets used. Number 2 on this list is ricotta, and it earns its place because of something almost nobody with diabetes has ever been told. Here's the question. What if 2 cheeses could look identical on a nutrition label and behave completely differently once they reach your bloodstream? Most cheeses are made from the solid curds of milk. Ricotta is different. It's made from whey, the liquid left behind after other cheeses are produced. That single difference changes everything about what happens after you eat it. The protein in most cheese is casein. The protein in ricotta is whey protein, the same protein sold in tubs at every fitness store in the country. Casein digests slowly, whey digests fast, and it's rich in an amino acid called leucine, one of the strongest natural triggers of a hormone called GLP-1, released from your gut after eating. That's the very same pathway that medications like semaglutide and tirzepatide were designed to target. Research looking at whey protein consumed shortly before a meal has found it can meaningfully blunt the after-meal blood sugar rise compared to a meal without it. Not because of a drug, because of a spoonful of cheese and the timing of when it hits your system. Here's a way to picture it. Casein is like a slow-burning log, releasing its warmth for hours. Whey is like kindling, catching fast, and in this case, sending a quick signal to your gut that says, slow down, we're full, ease off the glucose. For someone managing both blood sugar and cholesterol, ricotta offers something rare, meaningful protein with noticeably less saturated fat than most aged cheeses carry. If plain ricotta feels a little bland on its own, that's fair. Stir in fresh herbs, a little olive oil, a pinch of salt, and it becomes something you actually look forward to eating. Which brings us to the final cheese on this list, the one most people only ever sprinkle on pasta, never realizing it carries something tied directly to the organ at the center of this entire conversation, your pancreas itself. Number 1 is Parmesan. And I know that of everything on this list, this is the cheese you'd least expect to see at the top. Here's the question that's been building this entire video. What could a cheese people only ever sprinkle on pasta possibly have to do with how your pancreas releases insulin? I'm not talking about the powdered cheese in the green shaker can. I'm talking about authentic aged Parmigiano Reggiano, or a genuine domestic Parmesan aged 18 to 24 months. A small serving, the kind you'd use as a topping, carries more protein per gram than any other cheese on this list, with almost no carbohydrate at all. The long aging process also breaks down nearly all of the lactose, which is why even people with mild lactose sensitivity often tolerate it well. But the real reason it earns the top spot is vitamin K2. Aged Parmesan carries one of the highest concentrations of vitamin K2 found in any food on Earth. And K2 has growing evidence connecting it directly to how the pancreas manages insulin release. Research tracking tens of thousands of adults over roughly a decade found that higher K2 intake was associated with a meaningfully lower likelihood of developing type 2 diabetes over time. Here's the second reason this matters. Think of vitamin K2 as a traffic director for calcium in your body. With enough K2, calcium gets guided into your bones and teeth, exactly where you want it. Without enough, calcium can drift toward places it shouldn't, including the walls of your arteries. For someone managing type 2 diabetes, where arterial calcification already shows up more often than in the general population, that distinction matters far more than it first appears. A tablespoon or two grated over vegetables, eggs, or soup is all it takes. 5 cheeses down, 3 traps exposed. But there's one more piece of this story left, the one that ties everything together. And it starts with someone who almost didn't believe any of this could be true. Let me tell you about Laura. 69 years old, pre-diabetic, recently diagnosed with early bone thinning and the beginnings of calcium buildup in her arteries, a combination her doctor called common but concerning. She'd already cut cheese out of her life years earlier, certain it was working against her. Here's the question she asked me directly. How could adding a food back into her diet possibly help 2 problems that seemed completely unrelated? I asked her to try one small change: a tablespoon or 2 of aged Parmesan daily over vegetables and soup, alongside the walking routine she already had. Nothing dramatic, no medication changes, just that one addition. 8 months later, her long-term blood sugar marker had come down meaningfully, and her bone density, which her doctor had expected to keep declining, had stabilized. Here's why that isn't a coincidence. The same vitamin K2 directing calcium toward her bones instead of her arteries was at the same time supporting the pancreas function tied to her blood sugar. One small habit, 2 systems in her body listening to the same signal. That's the pattern running underneath everything we've covered today. Cheese was never the villain. The wrong version of it was. The processed slice pretending to be cheese. The hidden coating dusted into a shredded bag. The imbalanced tub sitting next to the bagels. Those were the real obstacles, quietly working against people who thought they were doing everything right by avoiding dairy altogether. The real cheeses, the fermented ones, the ones rich in whey protein or K2 or CLA, were sitting on the same shelf the whole time, waiting to be understood instead of feared. So here's the real question left for you tonight. Of the 5 cheeses on this list, which one is already sitting in your refrigerator, and which one are you finally ready to bring back? So here's what I want you to walk away with tonight. A diagnosis is not a sentence to give up the foods you love out of fear. It's an invitation to finally understand them. When you choose fresh mozzarella, you're feeding the bacteria, quietly supporting your insulin sensitivity from the inside. When you choose cottage cheese, you're buying yourself hours of freedom from the snack drawer before hunger even has a chance to sneak up. When you choose real sheep's milk feta, you're bringing in a fat tied to shrinking the visceral fat wrapped around your organs. When you choose ricotta, you're triggering the same hormone pathway some of today's most advanced diabetes medications were built around. And when you choose aged Parmesan, you're supporting both your pancreas and your arteries at the same time through a single vitamin most people have never heard of. This week, walk into your grocery store and buy 2 things: a tub of plain ricotta, a wedge of real aged Parmigiano Reggiano. Between those 2, you can cover most of your meals. And the next time you check your blood sugar after eating cheese, check it twice, once at the 1-hour mark and again 3 hours later. You may see something you've never noticed before. Everything shared here is meant to support the conversation with your own doctor. Never replace it. Bring these ideas to your next appointment before changing anything about your medication or your routine. I'm Dr. Rubio Santner, Metabolic Health Simplified. But understanding cheese is only half the story. The other half is the one mistake almost everyone makes with breakfast, the meal that sets your blood sugar tone for the entire day. And that's exactly where we're headed next.